Hello, my name is Amara Norman. I use she, they pronouns. I am the Operations and Communications Associate here at OUTWORDS. I am a Black femme. I have short Black braids, wearing a yellow shirt and dangly green earrings. I'm joining you from Los Angeles, California, on the traditional, ancestral, and stolen lands of the Tongva peoples. As a guest institution on Tongva land, OUTWORDS makes a recurring guest exchange to the Tongva Terhad Pa'ava Conservancy, the Tongva-led organization who received the first return of land back to the Tongva people. And if you'd like to learn more about how to pay a voluntary land tax to the indigenous peoples in your own area, there is a link about how to do that in the chat. And also, if you'd like to see closed captions for today's webinar, you can go ahead and click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it there, you might need to click more and you should see captions under there. Please also feel free to ask questions for our panelists in the chat or use the Q&A function throughout the panel. We'll go ahead and try and get to all of those at the end. And also, if you have any tech issues today, I am your behind the scenes tech person, so feel free to go ahead and reach out to me in the chat if you need some assistance. As I mentioned, I am the Operations and Communications Associate at OUTWORDS. OUTWORDS records, preserves, and shares the stories of LGBTQ+ elders to build community and catalyze social change. We were founded over 9 years ago, and in that time, we've conducted nearly 350 interviews in 45 states, plus Washington, D.C. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about wearing Precedent. Bear with me just a couple of minutes here, and then we'll get into our amazing discussion. We are really excited to bring you this event, which highlights the behind the scenes work that we've done to bring you the new podcast, Bring Precedent. Bring Precedent is part of our Dare to Be Powerful initiative, which is an exploration into the state's political past, present, and future. And it's through the eyes of the elders that have shaped it along the way. Funded by California State Libraries, this multimedia initiative was 2 years in the making. And it's all about our elders who, whether organizing mutual aid efforts, gathering at tenants unions meetings, holding office, these individuals have fundamentally altered how our state and has altered our state and created new and ever evolving definitions of justice. So there's also a link about Dare to Be Powerful in the chat if you want to learn a little bit more. On to Bring Precedent, which is why we're all here today. That is a delve into the history of transgender, gender non-conforming, and intersex, or TGI, the visibility and legal rights in California and beyond, asking how did we get here and where will we go now? This podcast listening party will connect you with the podcast guests, producer, and other listeners to provide you with an insider perspective. The podcast was hosted by award-winning artist and OUTWORDS communication director, Jack McCarthy, and Trans Lifeline executive director, Kai Albiar-Hurton, who we have in attendance with us today. Guests include Judge Victoria Kolakowski, trans surgery pioneer Dr. Marcy Bowers, Trans Latina Coalition founder Bambi Salcedo, Stonewall veteran Christy Henderson Jenkins, Two-Spirit community leader Marcus Arana, and intersex activist and Tamar Mattis, and they are also here in attendance today, which is amazing. Bring Precedent. I'm going to play you a short trailer here, and then we'll get going.
History is cyclical. It will echo.
Our community has been under attack for centuries.
We carve the path for the younger generation. We are your past and you are our future.
We have to tell our stories and we have to tell our truths and we have to flip the narrative.
Hey, I'm Kai.
And I'm Jack.
And welcome to Queering Precedent.
This podcast is a deep dive into trans, gender expansive, two-spirit, and intersex legislation and politics with some legendary LGBTQ+ elders who continue to fight for us to this day.
I was the first transgender judge in California.
A woman had never done trans bottom surgery before, let alone a trans woman. So that was literally the shot heard around the world.
As I came out of the Stonewall, first thing they asked me, are you a man or you're a woman? I happen to be all woman, honey. So from that, I was arrested.
I saw firsthand the atrocities that trans women experience in immigration detention. And I was like, what can we do?
And that's when I became an intersex activist.
When I fight for trans liberation, I'm fighting for my own two-spirit liberation and vice versa.
Through the eyes of these trailblazers, this series asks, how did we get here? And where do we go now?
This podcast comes to you from the Outwards Archive, the first national effort to record, preserve, and share the stories of LGBTQ+ elders.
Find out more at queeringprecedent.org and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
We have to fight. That's what Stonewall stood for.
Thank you for keeping the fight going and for listening to your elders.
And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our amazing moderator, Alexis Sanchez. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Alexis Sanchez has worked in LGBTQIA+ advocacy for the last decade. Her background in public health policy with a focus on substance use disorders in the LGBTQ+ community, where she has been a thought leader in how systems of oppression contribute to shorter lifespans for people with multiple marginalized identities. Alexis is the Vice President of Programs at a national LGBTQ+ organization. In 2020, she was named Woman of the Year for California 30 by the 116th Congress.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Alexis. My pronouns are she, her, Aya. I'm a brown transgender woman. I'm wearing a cute, maroon and white outfit with matching earrings. I'm coming to you from Patwin Wintun land. I'm originally from Tongva and Chumash land, and I'm so excited to be here to moderate. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guests today, some of our hosts and the people who we're going to be speaking with. First, I'd like to start with Holy Old Man Bull, aka Marcus Arana. So Marcus is a retired gender identity discrimination investigator and policy analyst for the city and county of San Francisco, where he worked on health insurance coverage for transgender employees and their dependents. Previous jobs include field worker, carny, cook, radio DJ, and carpenter. Holy Old Man Bull is a bisexual transgender two-spirit elder who spends his retirement with public speaking, consulting, puttering in his veggie garden, and spending quality time with his beloved spouse Nancy and yellow lab Frankie. Born in the territory of Alaska and raised in California, Marcus lives in Sonoma County. He is Ama Muslim Olon, Blackfeet, Mexica, Irish, and Scottish. Next, I'd like to introduce Anne Tamar Mattis, who grew up in Southern Illinois and came out in 1988 at the age of 19. She's been an activist in the LGBTQI community ever since. She directed the National Lyric Youth Talk Line in the 90s and was the founding program director at the San Francisco LGBT Community Center. After graduating from Berkeley Law in 2006, she founded Interact, Advocates for Intersex Youth, the first organization in the world solely focused on legal advocacy for intersex youth. She is currently the Chief Administrative Officer at Liminal Medicine, a psychedelic medicine clinic she runs with her spouse of 28 years, Suji. Next, I'd like to introduce Kai Alviar Horton. Kai is a trans queer, gender expansive, neurospicy child of immigrant parents, Filipinx, Andean, Latinx activist, poet, healer, and Brujex, born as a settler on unceded homelands of the Chumash and Tongva people. Kai has the honor and privilege of being the new executive director here at Trans Lifeline. Kai brings a wealth of experience in nonprofit leadership. They've been a leader in trans advocacy and racial equity work for many years and apply this lens to the way they approach leadership within organizations. Kai is passionate about world building with his beloved community, imagining a world where queer and trans folks of color are resourced, celebrated, and honored. Finally, Luca Evans is an award-winning audio producer, journalist, filmmaker, and sound designer. Luca has worked on podcasts for the likes of The Guardian, BBC, and Audible, directed short documentary films for the BBC, and created Ignite, an award-winning independent podcast centering youth voices around the climate crisis. They're also an educator teaching podcast classes to kids age 7 and 17. So, let's all begin. I'm so excited to get to know some of you a little bit more and ask some of the questions and see some of the clips that we have coming up. So first off, I want to give the panelists just a moment to introduce themselves in case I missed anything important and so that they can give a visual description of themselves.
Okay, I'm Anne Tamar Mattis. I am a queer femme with long, dark blonde hair going gray. I'm wearing glasses, polka dot shirt, and a gray suit jacket. And I have nothing to add to your excellent introduction, except to offer apologies for my spouse, Dr. Suji Tamar Mattis, who was supposed to be here today and is not feeling well. So she's very sad not to be with us today. And I also just want to recognize in the audience that Mani Mitchell and David Straken are with us, who I regard as my elders and role models as intersex activists. And so it's thrilling to see that they are joining in, and I hope I don't get anything wrong.
I'm Marcus Arana. I'm a bisexual, trans, masculine, two-spirit elder. I'm wearing a red shirt with a beaded necklace and a black hat that says, "You are on native land." Um, I don't have much to add to that other than I'm an old guy in retirement, and yet I'm busier now doing activism than when I was young. And if I blip out and freeze, I'll come back, but I'm having really bad internet issues. So my apologies. And last of all, love to David and Lonnie, who were such a crucial part of the intersex report that we worked on. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you.
I can go next. Hey y'all. Alexis, thank you for that bio. I don't know that I have too much to add, but when you hear this voice, it's Kai speaking. He, they pronouns. I have light brown skin. I have a buzzed head with dark hair. I'm wearing a chain and a black ribbed tank and a tattoo on my chest. So when you hear this voice, that's who's speaking. I will say I am not feeling super well today, so I'm gonna try my best to stay as long as I can, but I might need to hop off at some point. But just wanted to be in space with y'all and say hello. So yeah, thanks for that.
And I will go. I'm Luca. I am a white trans masc person with short hair, large circular glasses, and a blue shirt, sort of peeking out the bottom of the frame. Um, yeah, it's just such a pleasure to be here, to have worked on this, to share space, both when making this program and also right now in this room. So I'm just feeling, yeah, grateful to be back in space with all of you and to those tuning in. So thanks again.
All right, with that, let's get into some of the questions. So the way I was thinking about structuring the conversation today was framing it in the terms of like where we have been for some of the younger listeners, and where we are in this moment, and then where we are going, right? Like I like to think of stories that way and kind of like what led us here, where are we now, and where are we going? And that's how I kind of wanted to structure it. For myself, something that was really seminal and something I remember when I first started doing activist work was kind of like my first policy win, right? Like when I got in the trenches, what was the first thing that I worked really hard on, and what is kind of like the victory from that stemmed from that. So the question that I have for the hosts and panelists is, what is the first LGBTQIA civil rights or public policy battle that you remember? Specifically, you as an individual remember being a part of, and what's the first win that you remember?
I've been doing activism for a long time, but my first real big win came in 2001 when a project I was working on for the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, which was transgender health benefits for city employees, retirees, and our dependents. And we were able to get it, first of all, into the city funded plan where it cost a bit of money for every employee, but over 3 years, we finally moved it into the HMOs. And when that happened, the HMOs had to drop their exclusions nationwide because when San Francisco did it, they couldn't discriminate in Boise or any other place. So when I hear young people talk about getting gender affirming care covered by insurance, I feel really, really grateful to have a small part in that. That was my first big win, 2001.
Yeah, I struggled with this question because I think so much of the early years for me and being involved in political activism was so much about personal victories as much as political legal ones. coming out was a personal victory. And I grew up with so little information about the place of queer people in the world. I think I didn't come out until I was 19 because I didn't really know that that was a thing that you could be, especially because I did like boys, so it just wasn't clear to me like there was any option other than being straight. But I do, and so the personal work really merged with the political work. I do remember being involved. I was at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and really my role model there, who brought me into the political scene, was Rebecca Hensler, who was also very involved in the San Francisco political scene and ACT UP. And she really educated me a lot about the AIDS epidemic, which I had not heard of when I came to college in 1987. They didn't talk about it in Southern Illinois. And the ways that our community was being held down, like that was all tied up with me with my coming out. But I think and then we were doing a lot of like local activism, city council statements and, small things there in Providence. But the first big win I remember was actually when Bill Clinton was elected. This was after 8 years of Ronald Reagan, who wouldn't even say the word AIDS, and 4 years of his former Vice President Bush holding policy. So that was 12 years in my youth. It seemed like there had been nothing but Reagan and Bush. And by then I was in the Bay Area, and we went to the Castro because that's where you went when things happened, and everybody was dancing in the streets, and we took over the streets of the Castro whenever we wanted back then. And so we'd stop the trolley cars with toilet paper, and everybody was out in the streets singing "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead." And it was huge. Like now that's all ancient history, and we can all critique Clinton too and all the policy that came after. But at that moment, it was a huge transformational thing for me in my early 20s that these folks that had been in charge for 12 years were no longer in charge. And Clinton wasn't perfect, but he didn't want us dead. So it was like a new world, I think, that moment.
I want to add onto what Mark has shared, in a way of also bringing Jack into this room, who is the co-producer and co-host, and is not here because he just had a baby. So, who is so adorable. This is also a little bit of a spoiler because Jack mentions this in the 6th episode that is not out yet. So here's a sneak peek for those on this call. But yeah, he mentions that he did get top surgery, and that is, as he knows, with direct benefit from the work that you, Marcus, did. So it's just been so really evident in the sort of the personal and the political, and obviously both of those are intertwined, as we made this series, just how indebted we are to the work that has come before us. And that just feels so inherently true in every single episode that we have made. So yeah, also just again to kind of bring Jack into that room in a way of having a story in direct response to that question.
I think it also brings up this notion that the work we are doing today is not for ourselves, it's for everybody who comes after us.
Hi, did you have a story you wanted to add?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I was thinking about, I knew I was queer from like a very young age. It was like very obvious. Also, if I had words for being trans, I would have known I was trans for a very long time, but at the time I didn't. And I didn't know any elders that were trans or out as trans, so I definitely didn't have the language to describe myself. But I remember when I grew up in LA, and LA was a place that could radicalize you very quickly, politically, because of the ways in which the city and the people move. And I remember when Prop 8 was a thing, back in the day, I was a very young person going to City Hall in downtown LA, and I was holding a sign that was literally like "No on hate" and all these things, and talking to a lot of like queer elders at that time to me, and having them be like, "How old are you? Like, how did you get here?" And all the things. And I was just like, it matters that these people see that queer people are of all ages and we exist everywhere, right? And so I remember that. And then, that was like, I believe my activist baby era. I was like, okay, like I'm here and I'm very queer. And so, yeah, I can remember that moment. And since then have really dedicated my life to that as well.
Thanks everyone for sharing. Now we're gonna play a little clip. We're gonna play an excerpt from Anne and Suji's episode.
I wanted to touch on the Protect Intersex Children Act that's currently in Congress.
Right. The Protect Intersex Children Act, one of the issues with the act is that it limits its scope to children under age 6. In other words, it would allow doctors and parents to start pressuring those children at age 6 to choose surgeries. I also know that getting legislation through often involves compromise, right? That is one of the challenges about the law. Many intersex activists will not accept a law or a step that doesn't protect everyone. And that's something that our community has to struggle with, right? Like, what are the right decisions and compromises to make in these situations? Right now, the federal administration is trying to erase all references to intersex people as well as transgender people. One of the interesting things about the efforts around the country to restrict medical care for transgender children is they often contain explicit exclusions for intersex kids, which really shows that those laws about transgender kids are not about protecting kids from invasive or poorly planned medical care. They're really about normalizing kids, right? And as long as you're normalizing the right kind of kids, that's still okay. But yeah, the Protect Intersex Children Act, I'd be happy if it went through, but I do not think that an act like that will get through this current federal Congress. But I'm very happy that that's still an active conversation, at least on one side of the aisle, right? Because it is the first federal legislative effort, and you do have to bring a law up often over and over and over again before you get it through.
One of my favorite questions to ask folks who have lived longer than me is, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for younger generations?
I have no wisdom.
Oh, God.
But I always have something to say.
Let's go with that.
I'm thinking about particularly the times we find ourselves in, which are hard and frightening times. And I would say be aware of the value and importance of compromise, because if your standards are too high, you have no allies.
And especially if you want to do political work, you really want to build a community and try and make it as broad-based as possible. At the Interconnect conferences, I met so many serious evangelical born-again Christians who were anti-surgery because my baby was born the way God made my baby, and how dare doctors say we need to change that. And being able to be with people who had such different backgrounds as, like, I grew up as a New York Jew and my grandparents immigrated from Russia as Orthodox Jews. I think it really helped me in like getting that bigger, broader sense of how we are all so interconnected.
This is so exciting to get to listen to clips and have, the panelists that were part of it here. So again, I want to continue framing the discussion around where the conversation around civil rights for transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex folks was when you first started doing the work that you've dedicated your lives to. So what are some of the barriers that LGBTQIA people face that really stuck out to you when you started your own journeys, both professionally and personally?
Okay, so I came out as trans in 1994 when most organizations had only just begrudgingly added the L to the G. And an early part of my work was actually going to L&G organizations to explain to them why they needed to add the T. So that was one challenge. And the other challenge, which I've already alluded to, is there was absolute no gender affirming care that wasn't out of your pocket, which was very expensive, very prohibitive for people who wanted to make medical transitions. You had to save up money or go in debt. So that's how much the world has changed. And I think when we are seeing what's going on in the current climate with all these laws being passed against trans bodies and against intersex bodies, that that it's a backlash to the gains that we made in the 90s and the early 2000s. And as we've watched the pendulum swing in that direction, we will see it and are seeing it swing back in the other direction. So keep up the hope.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think it was a similar time for me when I was coming into the community. It was in the middle of what they called the transgender wars, right? Which was would transgender people be allowed in any of our organizations, especially women's organizations? I was at my school. I was a member of the LGBA at my college, and they had just added the B, and that had been a big fight. And there was still an easiness about it. And I was there for the big fight about, well, will we add the T? And, we did, but it was hard. And when I first moved to San Francisco in the early 90s, I was living with Susan Stryker, who also interviewed in your archives. She was a big part of my education in just understanding transgender issues and understanding how to be an ally to the trans community. And yeah, it was very much the fight then was about, can trans people be in the room? And will gay and lesbian groups throw down for trans people? I was working on a case with Shanna Mintner back when the decision was made. I don't know, this was back, I think, in the early 2000s, to cut transgender people out of the federal, what was the Employment Rights Act they were working on then. Because it was thought that it would be too much, that we might get an anti-discrimination act passed for gay and lesbian people, but if we tried to include transgender people, that would be too much and that would sink the act. And Shannon, who is a brilliant out trans attorney, was very involved with the organizations that were making those decisions and was, of course, personally heartbroken about it, as I was. And the bill didn't pass anyway. Keeping trans people out wasn't enough. And now the same organizations have they've learned a lot of lessons and they've embraced the community. And I think there is much more of a feeling now. Of course, there's still discrimination and prejudice, but I think there's much more of a feeling now that we all need to hang together. And that I think we are all aware that the transgender community now is, the thin blue line between all of us and everybody's civil rights, right? They're the tip of the spear, the ones that are being attacked first. And I think there's much more of a feeling that everybody on the left, we all need to kind of protect each other. So in that way, I have a lot of hope because, yeah, there's always backlash and steps back, but I have a lot of hope that I feel like the left is a lot smarter and more unified. Again, not perfect, but a lot better than they were back then. We were much more fragmented and we just didn't understand each other's issues as well.
That was the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Yeah. And regrettably, one of the people lobbying against transgender inclusion was Representative Bernie Frank, who was an openly gay representative, because he had that feeling that it somehow was a bridge too far. And I just want to say that people who are attacked for being gay or lesbian or bisexual are usually attacked because of this perceived gender transgression. We all share that in common. They're not asking you if you're a sissy queen or a butch dyke, whether or not you're trans. It's all about gender transgression, and we all share that in common, and that comes from sexism, and we all share that in common. So I agree that things have gotten better, and yet I still find that trans voices are lacking at the table of national politics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that framing of the backlash is really helpful, right? I think even about my own journey as someone who transitioned while ago, who transitioned back in the days where you had to live as your gender identity for a year, do a social transition before they prescribed any HRT to you. And then we made all of these strides, move towards informed consent models. But now in many states, right, the pendulum has swung back and now the threshold is a lot higher. Things that seemed like the things that we almost took for granted, we're back in a space. But I think both of you have spoken to the lessons that we have learned. And I think that's why podcasts such as this are so important, because the organizing lessons, the strategy lessons, all of the things that we have worked on before, we can apply those to the moment that we're in now. And I think that is like some of the most important work that we can do right now. My next question is for our hosts and producers. Can you speak to a story from a panelist that really stayed with you and maybe shifted your view of our shared history and struggle?
Ooh, from every episode, there is something that sticks out to me. But I'm going to speak to the most salient and present one because it happened a few days ago. I was driving with my spouse and our dog in the back of the car. And, we were driving and I was like, oh my gosh, the episode with Marcus just dropped. I really want to listen to it. And so we listened to it in our car with the volume all the way up and just hearing like the tonal beauty of Marcus, your voice, and then like my own T voice, and then all everybody else's voices in the space was so beautiful. And at the end, if you haven't listened to Marcus's episode, please do, because the end part where we ask essentially like what is something that's bringing you hope? And Marcus, you invite us to remember all these things happening in nature. And I just wanted to say that, since starting tea, I don't cry as often as I'd like to. I was sobbing. I was literally a mess. I was sobbing. It felt like the exact medicine that I needed, especially in the political moment that we're in. Just that reminder about land and about how we're all connected and our ancestors and all the things. And so I'll say that for now, but there's every episode. I mean, I can think of Anne and Suji, and just your love story was just like enough for me to be like, there's hope, there's beauty in this world, And so, yeah, just so grateful for every single person because every episode made me cry in some way. It was just so powerful. Luca, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. There are so many. And I think what is really so beautiful to me about this series too is that like interweaving of stories with the history and the just we have this segment, if for those who haven't listened, called The Road to Now, where we're sort of detailing the how we got to here for those who need a sort of crash course. And what's really cool is the way in which our guests really fed into that history. So we get a sort of like immediate dose of sort of like the top lines. And then we hear really the stories behind that unfold. And we then think, oh God, that thing that was sort of noted as a like historic event, and here's the person. And I just love how that is so so alive in these episodes. I also think it's really cool specifically to have Marcus and Anne and Suji. I hope that she feels feels better. But the way I think particularly that your two episodes really speak to each other is, and again, Kai, you spoke when in some of the reflections that we were recording about the way that there was this sort of like bringing of everybody into the space, this like collective shared history. And even, before we started today, the ways in which there's this collective remembering between the two of you and also between all of our episodes. These stories are interweaving, Marcus being instrumental in the intersex report and Suji testified and all of these things, again, sort of thinking about the shared history and the shared struggle that was just so incredibly present. And from an editing standpoint, it makes it almost hard to edit because you're like, where does this begin? How do we start and unfortunately podcast that is not, it has to be linear. But that's tough because this isn't linear. And also speaking to the ways in which, Anne, you speak about how you were told by activists that backlash is baked into any progress. And Marcus, you speak to sort of 2 steps forward and 1 step back is making forward progress. And to be hearing those 2 things, I think also for me, again, and having them next to each other helps me remember. Hearing them again and again just reminds me of this, like, this push and pull, which I think really became the central theme of the podcast, is something that has helped me feel better in this time. Really, not only having that as a fact, but having that as a story. Tying that back to my first point, as if I planned this answer. Yeah, the sort of factual sentences of the progress that has happened and the storytelling. I think both of those together were instrumental in helping me not just thrive daily in this moment. So again, thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for contributing to that history that we are now reporting on and celebrating in and benefiting from truly directly now.
I think that's a really good segue into a clip from Marcus's episode. So let's go ahead and play that now.
You spoke to some ways that Two-Spirit people are being reintegrated into Native life and helping different groups remember their Two-Spirit history. What are some of the obstacles and challenges to that? Are there legal obstacles? And also, what are the victories? I know that's like 3 questions in one, so we can break that down.
Let me start with the obstacles being historical disenfranchisement and institutionalized homophobia vis-a-vis the churches. When that permeates tribal cultures, then the Two-Spirit people have to work hard to make those changes. I think one really illustrative, beautiful thing that happened just this last year was that Stephen Barrios was transferred rights to an upright headdress in a woman's upright headdress society in Montana, which, if you don't know Indian culture, societies are very important groups that honor people for their work. And not only are they like community groups, but they're spiritual groups. They hold prayers. Those headdresses have great meanings. They're eagle feathers. It's very, very important. And this is the first time that a person assigned male at birth was transferred these rights into this woman's headdress society. And it was a recognition of the divine feminine. It was so much of what the Two-Spirit movement has been working toward, and that is to get the people to remember how important we were in community. And the gravity of that cannot be understated, how important that was to the Two-Spirit movement and to the Indian world and to the Blackfeet people. This person had been out loud and proud on the res all his life and had to fight against bullying and stand proud and all like that, was suddenly being recognized by his own community for the divine feminine and the Two-Spiritness. Wow. And this was done in front of everybody on the reservation. So it wasn't just a Two-Spirit thing, it was a cultural Blackfeet thing. You know,
I'm getting a little teary.
I get a little teary too, and somewhat goosebumpy. And I can leap to the third part of that and to say, for example, in South Dakota, a Lakota lesbian couple challenged their tribe and got the rules changed so they would accept same-gendered marriages. So there's ways that Two-Spirit people are making it better, not just for Two-Spirit people, but other LGBT people as well who may live and be from those communities. Working in tribal government is no different than working in regular government. You need people on the inside who are sympathetic and empathetic enough to listen and be willing to speak for the people on the outside screaming for change. And that's how change happens.
That's incredible. Okay, my next question is for our panelists. So just recognizing the intersectional nature of our struggles, what are some of the lessons from past civil rights movements that we can apply to this moment that we are in now?
Wow, that's a deep question and a big bridge to build. I think the kind of inspiration I draw are from all of the civil rights movements that involve passive resistance. That when you are nonviolent and you stand your course and you are willing to take it on the chin, eventually hearts and minds do change. And we saw that in India when they threw out the British. And we saw that in many, many different civil rights movements in this country, queer civil rights movements, women's movements, trans movements, all of this. So I think that's one lesson to take with us into these current days is do not let them provoke you into violence because it gives them a reason to come down on us. And what we have to do is show that we are better than the violence that they're trying to drag us into. Because breaking stuff is not going to fix things. Breaking stuff is not going to make this stuff go away. What makes this stuff go away is not taking no for an answer, not backing down, and insisting on your civil rights.
Yeah, so many lessons from the past. I mean, I would say one of the big ones is study your history in many ways. Study any civil rights movement. Study the stories of anyone who lived through a period of great change. When Trump was elected the first time, I put up a long thing on my Facebook page about we all need to start studying Germany in the 1930s. And we need to figure out what good Germans did. What were the actions they took? When did they decide this is too much collaboration? You know, the stories that are put out about the evil ones, but there were it was a civilization of ordinary people that was taken over by a madman, a genocidal madman who was bent on an authoritarian structure. And it's something we need to understand now is what did ordinary people do to resist? And I think as a lawyer, I take a lot of lessons from the civil rights movement as well. And I know the early LGBT activists, the ones that came just a generation before me, took a lot of lessons from that movement. And a piece of that was about planning. The story of the African American civil rights movement is often told as if it was spontaneous action. Rosa Parks just didn't get off the bus one day. That wasn't how that happened. That was planned. It was staged. She was chosen, and she was very brave to take that action. She got on alone. She did that by herself. But there was planning and forethought, and that's how you make a movement. You build connections, you have allies, and you plan for incremental change. You know, she didn't think that refusing to get off the bus would suddenly change everything, that now they'll let her ride in the front of the bus, right? But she knew it was an important action to take. And yeah, so I don't know, study your history is pretty important and look for the patterns because that's where you can figure out how to act. And I agree with what Marcus is saying about nonviolence too, and I think it's very important at this moment. And I know for some people, nonviolence is like a calling, and I feel, Marcus, what you say about, you know, don't let them lower you. I think nonviolence is also often just a good strategy, whether or not you think it's a moral imperative. And if someone comes for me and my kids, I'll fight them. Um, but it's better if we don't, partly because when someone else holds the reins of power, their machine can crush you. And what we need to do is figure out how to get control of the machine, right? Not how to get crushed by it.
So now for our hosts and producers, are there any lessons that you're taking away from the recording process that will inform the way that you approach the current moment?
My gosh, so many things. Something I was reflecting on with my friends, I was like gloating about having the gift of meeting all these amazing elders. And I think, you know, folks I was talking to, essentially, I think I think where I landed was just in this moment of like, it is so important to name your lineages in spaces. Like, every single guest on this podcast taught me what it looks like to like take the time to name the people that informed who they are in the room. Every time they spoke, it was like, sorry, the siren is very loud. I'm gonna pause for a second. I learned from Luca that it comes onto the audio. Anyways, yeah, I feel like that alone, that practice of naming your lineage and naming the people who inform how you show up in the world is something that I grieve my generation does not do very well. And I can maybe look to like technology, social media, Google for the reasons that we don't name how information and how history is even held. And so for me, I've been trying to practice more this idea of like when I think about movement work, when I think about how I show up in my politic, like who informs that and how do I bring them into the room? Because on a spiritual level, right? Like on like a yeah, on a spiritual, cultural level, when I invite my ancestors or my comrades into a space, I become more powerful. Like I immediately am rooted in something bigger than myself, right? And I think these guests really taught me that, in addition to so many things, but that feels really alive for me.
I'm also have been reflecting on again just how um, such a privilege it's been to have these intergenerational conversations, which is also not something I get to do very often. I guess I'll speak a little bit to the very unique process of being able to sit at this sort of intersection of oral history and journalism, which I think has been particularly cool for me in the making of this podcast. First of all, the Outwards archive is incredible and served us so many ways. Not only in it being the ultimate free interview because we just had this bank of all of the stories we knew we could ask about and more, which was brilliant. It also meant that we could really do more in terms of bringing other people into the room, because we can, if somebody references another Outwards interviewee, we also have that audio and we can sort of auditorily bring them into the room in that program. But also, again, in terms of process, the thing that has been so rich for me is thinking about what journalism can learn from oral history, about what it means to be. It's very interesting, again, sort of thinking about the editorial difference between sort of taking an oral history and then making an editorial program, and the sort of decisions you make to edit a program that still feels true to the original tape, but obviously has to be in this short, specific way. And I think we did a lot of really sitting with that to be true to the guests that we had on the show, and really honor your stories, which I think is something that journalism doesn't do very well often. It sort of has this extractivist approach, and I again have been really felt very lucky to be able to incubate that process in an oral history organization and really think about, again, the way that oral history can further inform journalism, and to really think about that when going back into journalistic organizations. What can I bring as lessons from an oral history archive and from Outwards' mission, really?
Okay, so I have one more scripted question for all of you, and then we will be taking questions from the audience as well. So earlier, Marcus alluded to oftentimes, these battles are the battles that we carry for our lifetimes, and then we hand them off to the next generation, right? Like I very much working in the LGBTQ plus movement, sometimes with younger staff, I'll tell them like, I am working on planting the seeds that will bloom for you all, right? So with that in mind, what are some of the things that you felt that you've carried your entire career and want to now hand off to the next generation, where maybe you've seen no progress or a little progress, but we know that we have to keep working at that?
Well, I'll go first, and I'll call Suji into the room because I know this is a thing for her too. It is very hard to recognize that after 30 plus years of working on intersex rights, that surgeries are still being done on intersex babies non-consensually. Beau Laurent, Cheryl Chase, who founded the intersex rights movement, will say, you know, she thought all we need to do is tell people, hey, this isn't working the way you think it is, and they would stop. And 30 years later, it hasn't. It's stopped. And it burns you out. I mean, that's after 11 years, that's basically why I left Interact, was not because I thought the work was hopeless, but I knew that I could not carry it any longer. And I think that's something very important for young people to do is they've got a great team there now, and they're younger than me, and they're not burnt out yet. And, you know, they have hope and belief. And, you know, I think a lot of times the younger community comes in, and it may be naive. Maybe I was naive when I was young, you know, of like, we're going to fight and we're going to win, but you need that energy. You need that. And so there, I mean, there's so many other things that at some point we need to hand off to the younger community. But for me, it's that, it's not that I'm not still fighting that fight, but I can't fight it every day. I have too much secondary trauma. I have too much burnout. And most people who do it, there's not many people who do it for a decade or more, but most who do burn out. And I feel a little bit ashamed saying that in front of David and Mani listening, because they were in this before me and they're still in it. But that's like the ability to hand off, I think, is important. The ability to recognize burnout is important. And the energy of young people to believe that they can create that change, even if you won't do everything you think you can do, you'll be that, you know, that next piece in the relay. And you got to come in fresh and do that, because it is a relay and it's long.
Yeah, I have to agree with Anne that everybody knows trans now, and it's very visible and it's out there, but nobody's talking about intersex in the way that it should be, because it's horrendous. And at the Human Rights Commission, and I'll say this because I don't work there anymore, we absolutely spanked their butts, the medical community, in front of everybody, and declared unequivocally that it's a human rights abuse to do surgery on patients who cannot consent. And they could only toss up one doctor who gave feeble excuses and really seriously lied to us in the commission hearing. So I really want, the reason why we got the intersex report to happen was because of allyship, and I was an ally to the intersex community. I want allies to step forward from wherever they come from and help the intersex movement do what was envisioned decades ago, and that's ending these unwanted surgeries, these unwanted medical procedures, all of this normalization that's going on.
Yeah, I think I have been thinking a lot about this recently. There's a few things. One is that I'm in my mid-30s, so by no means am I an elder, but I am in a lot of space with folks who are in Gen Z, so they're, you know, in their 20s. And I notice that something that is happening is the term community is used as a sort of precursor to feel good. And that's the only way we can be in community, is if we feel good together. And I think that generative conflict is something I hope we don't lose the capacity and skill set for. I really hope that we can continue to learn what it means to not always feel good, but still choose each other, because otherwise we're not building that like stamina that it takes to get free. So I think that, and I think the other thing is like, there are like micro moments of liberation that happen every single day that don't make it to your Instagram page, right? And so like, how do we make sure that like in those moments we're like fully embodied and we're present and we're acknowledging that like these moments are drops in the ocean for liberation, right? And so that's what I'm hoping I see in my generation, in my own body, and then the future generations, is that we don't lose the moments nobody's watching, and that those moments matter too, right? So I think those are the two things that have been on my mind a lot, especially again in this political moment. Um, yeah, and I grieve that, again, I feel that I was not necessarily given the tools to know it a different way, right? And so, um, yeah, it's like learning new skills is a scary thing to do. But we have elders that do it already and ancestors that did it before them. So, yeah, it's big.
I I do more work in terms of sort of storytelling than in terms of sort of direct advocacy. So I've been thinking a lot about my role as a storyteller within movements, and I again feel very privileged to have been working on this series and really thinking about how to amplify and share these stories and how to really contribute the skill set of storytelling to try and achieve narrative change. So I guess I've been reflecting as I've been listening about how does series like this, I guess, contribute to that narrative change over the long haul. I guess I in my life have not seen that shift, and hope that if I get to being an elder, will have seen narrative change and really see how that sort of shifts. I think it's been interesting to think about the role of different things within our movements, and again thinking about the sort of power of stories that we've been hearing within all of the podcasts in shifting narrative change, and how that could really work together, and how journalists myself can use these skills to uplift marginalized voices in order to contribute to the brilliant advocacy that people such as yourselves are doing. So again, I just want to express the gratitude to have shared space and to be able to amplify the work that you have been doing and continue to do, to with the hopes to sort of help contribute to that narrative change over the long haul.
I think that the work that Outwards is doing is absolutely laying a blueprint for the narrative change.
Mhm. We kind of leave Easter eggs for each other, and we don't know. And I think this is one of the privileges of being an older activist is you do get to look back and see, well, I didn't know that I was making change back then, but now I see the results. Marcus was talking about the HRC report on intersex and this doctor, Larry Baskin, who's still doing surgeries at UCSF Biniat Children's Hospital, who made serious misstatements to the committee. And actually his hospital ended up having to write a letter to the HRC distancing themselves from what he had said. It was quite scandalous. And Marcus made sure all of that got included in the report. All those letters got included in the report. So what I don't think you know, Marcus, I was saying there's more history from that than you know. And there's when we make ripples that we don't see. Over 10 years later, I was deposing Larry Baskin for a lawsuit. He was an expert for the other side, so we weren't suing him, but he was an expert for the other side, and I was deposing him. And I went and pulled that report up and asked him to explain himself, which in the process just made it really clear that he was going to be totally discredited on the witness stand, and he could not be an effective witness because his own hospital said that he lied about this stuff. And so, you know, I don't think Marcus knew that. It was a critical point in that lawsuit. And it's like this little Easter egg he left for me that I dug up and found. And the kind of stories you guys are telling here, it's not possible to know, you know, who's going to take hope from one of these and going to grow up to be the next leader, you know, and, you know, we'll say, well, I heard Marcus say, way back in the day, I heard something from this guy, Marcus Rana, on this podcast, and it changed my life. You know, you won't know. But the work you're doing, wherever you're working in the movement, is going to have effect. And sometimes you will get the privilege of seeing it. And sometimes you won't even know what other people do with your work.
I had no idea that my public spanking would be of great avail to your case. And if I had any small part in discrediting him as being any kind of an expert, I can go to sleep happily tonight.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge Kai's contributions tonight. Kai had to hop off our stream here, but I'm happy to take some time to take some questions from the audience.
It may just be that folks are typing, but I did have one question. As an Outwards insider, I have the privilege of looking through a lot of photos that we get from interviewees. They're kind enough to send in. And I feel like that is the one of the big parts of my job that I enjoy. Like I find myself going through the photos being like, this is what I do it for, getting to like witness some of those moments and those little pieces of history. So I'm wondering if, and this is for Alexis as well, I'm wondering like in all of your current work, what are those moments for you? Or is there one specific moment that, as we continue to like fight for liberation, are there kind of like more innocuous moments that you find yourself really like empowered by?
Back in the Interact days, we worked on something we called the Apology Project, where we went out to, we worked with individual intersex people, we took down their stories, and we went out to the doctors who had done surgeries on them and the hospitals where they had had surgeries and asked them to apologize because we couldn't sue them. The statute of limitations had run for most of those people. And when we got our first apology back, Suji and I were actually in England. I think we were traveling to celebrate her graduation from residency. And I just remember like we were looking at the window of our hotel and there was this castle wall outside. And I just remember being like, a little piece of the wall is coming down, and it felt like this very big moment for us. So I don't know, that apologies are one of the ways you can tell stories that change hearts and minds. They don't have legal effect, but they have huge effect on people's hearts, both making an apology and knowing that an apology was made. It's really important to celebrate those little moments as well as the big ones when we elect the president we want and we're dancing in the street. It's all important.
So for me, it was about the getting gender affirming care. And we knew we had to get some conservative voices to give us at least a not a disapproving take on it. And there was this one columnist, Deborah Saunders, who was with the Chronicle in San Francisco, and she was very much against the Speakers Bureau I was at Kuof, and talked about how we were out recruiting kids and teaching them to be queer and all this kind of stuff. And so fast forward another 7 years, I go to her and I say, let's have this interview. And she sits down with us and listens to me say, if you're going to pay for a hysterectomy in Mary, why wouldn't you pay for it in Marcus? And we had this conversation. And by golly, she wrote a really affirming editorial saying it just makes common sense that this is the only fair thing to do is to remove these restrictions. So I think that's one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, like you said, a chip in the wall where you can see hearts and minds change. And that's where real change happens. I also want to say that allyship is crucial. And so to hear you talk about the good you could do with that report is confirming that we can't succeed without the help of other people, and we lift each other up.
I think I have one of those stories that I'd like to share as well. I'm so thrilled that Bambi Salcedo was one of the guests on this because she has been such a big part of my own transition and my own journey into activism and my own learning. And there was a time where I was just like a little baby trans like woman, trans Latina, like learning how to navigate things. And remember I went to Trans Latina Coalition right around the holidays because I didn't have much to do and I wanted to help and maybe like surf some stuff. So Bambi was sitting there and just like Bambi exudes so much knowledge. She just has given me just little pearls of wisdom wrapped in humor. And I remember I was sitting there with Hallie Sahar, who eventually went on to be cast in Pose. Before any of us we were just like trans women, just there in space with Bambi, taking up that wisdom, wrapping presents, which would eventually be given to some of the folks for Christmas that came to Trans Latina Coalition. And I think that's like you mentioned, right? Like one of those innocuous moments. It was just, I didn't have anything to do that day. I'm going to go to Trans Latina Coalition. I'm going to sit in community with people, and eventually that wisdom of Bambi flows into other people who go on and make waves, right? Like Hallie gets cast in this big show, inspires a new generation of like young trans women. I go on to start to do advocacy work and to continue the legacy. And it's just the small things, and that's just, yeah, those little moments.
I also want to add on about Marcus, what you were saying about the importance of allies is also another through thread through the series as well that I think is really important to highlight. And I remember Anne, you saying at the end of that episode about sort of remembering the importance of compromise, otherwise you have no allies, and really thinking about how allies fit into this work. This is a real pivot, but this is mostly because I was distraught when we had to cut the story of your marriage and from the episode because we just couldn't fit it in for time. So my sincere apologies to put you on the spot, but it is such a brilliant story that I would love to hear again if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure, the story of my marriage to Suji and how that came about. So okay, I hope I hit the part you want me to. But so Suji and I were married in 1996. That was long before same-sex marriage was legal anywhere. She originally had been assigned female and had a female identification history, as I did, because that is my gender identity as well. I am cisgender female. And I wasn't a lawyer yet then, but I was starting to study the law and look at it and ask questions, and learned that in California, if a woman is married to a man at that time, a woman could only be married to a man, and she had a baby, that the man was the father of her baby legally. And while that could potentially be challenged by a biological father, it pretty much couldn't be challenged by anybody else. And so if we could just get married, then she would be the father of our children. And at that time, also, there was same-sex adoption was possible in California, but the way you had to do it, we had a governor that was very opposed to it. And so the way you had to do it is you'd have to have a social worker visit, you'd have to go to court. The social worker would have to testify that it was great parents, it was great household, it was a wonderful place to raise a baby, but I have to recommend against this adoption because it is not the policy of the state of California to place children in a same-sex household. So we didn't have a lot of money, and if the judge could overrule that recommendation, but it would just depend what judge you got, right? And then you'd have to go back and try again if it didn't work, and it was expensive. We didn't have that kind of money. Plus, we thought it was humiliating for Suji to have to adopt her own child. And so I wasn't really down with the same-sex marriage movement at that point. I thought marriage was an archaic patriarchal institution that I wanted no part of. But I did figure out that if we could figure out how to get married, she would be the father and we wouldn't have to do an adoption. So then what I found out is that all you needed at that time to get married in California was a driver's license. And because of the work already done by trans activists, it was fairly easy to change your driver's license in California at that point. You needed a letter from a doctor, but it just needed to say, in my opinion, this is this person's gender. And so she got a doctor's letter. She changed her driver's license, so it had an M on it. It still does. That caused other problems later, but she doesn't really care what her gender markers are. She's willing to go with whatever. And her documentation's mixed to this day, but she got a male driver's license. We went down to Oakland City Hall. presented our driver's licenses. They took a real hard look at Suji. I led with my big 9-month pregnant belly and was just looking at the clerk like, he's going to marry me and you better not get in the way because this baby's going to come out. And we got our license and we got married 2.5 weeks before our oldest child was born. So that was a fun little creative use of the law. It was a marriage that happened in our community before anybody else got married. There was a lot of media interest and a documentary and a lot of other stuff. But the important thing for us that came out of that was, both the recognition of our relationship and Suji's being a legal parent to our children.
It's also a perfect example of subverting the dominant paradigm.
Yes.
And that's how you succeed in times like this, is through subversion.
Yeah. I always felt like we stole our family, It's like we just stole it right from under the nose of the people in power because they didn't want to give it to us, but we took it anyway.
Thanks for sharing that. I love hearing that story.
Mason Funk just put in the comments, Sheila Cool referring to becoming a lawyer is learning the tools of the enemy. Absolutely. That is completely why I did it. I meditated long on how can I be of best use given my privileges and talents and skills and interests? How can I be of best use to the movement? And it was really clear that I was well positioned to be a lawyer. And I was like, yeah, I want to learn that. And Suji and I talk about that period of our lives when I went to law school and she went to medical school, which was after the kids were born. We had 2 small children at that point. Was we had been really radical street activists, and we were like, okay, we're going deep undercover now, and we're gonna, dye our hair normal colors and, try to talk the right way and say the right things and get the right internships so that we can get these degrees and be of service to our community. And that's not the path everyone should take, but it is one good path. And learning the tools of the enemy and turning it against them is critical.
Sometimes you just have to code shift to get things done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember hearing too, it's a theme from many episodes, but I really love the way that you framed it, Marcus, about pressure from the inside and pressure from the outside. And it's also been really cool to see the ways in which so many of the relationship, I guess, to activism, to working inside, to, I wish I could remember, Anne, what you said literally moments earlier about taking control of the machine. That's not exactly how you said it, but that's the idea. And so that's also another theme that's really ruminating in my head of this relationship to people on the outside and people on the inside.
I think the intersex report is a perfect example of that coalition between insider and outsider, because the activists came to us and said, get this done. And I took it to my boss, who said, no, it's not our problem. It's a health issue. And I said, yeah, but they're trying to insist that they want to make gay babies straight through all of this. And he went, oh, as a gay man, suddenly it was important and it changed. But that's a really good example of that.
Yeah, and I think that was something I learned from activists who went before me in the HIV movement. It was in the HIV movement, there was a lot of insider-outsider churn, right? And the same people would be at the tables doing policy meetings with policy makers, and then would be outside the streets chaining themselves to the gate. Or they all would have been at the same meeting before, right? So the lawyers would be walking by the people that are chained to the fence making their protest, and they'd be like, yeah, coffee later, saw you at the rally last week. And there wasn't this sense that if you were working from the inside, you were selling out, or if you were working from the outside, that you were just disruptive and a problem. There was a sense that we needed all of that and we needed to coordinate it. And one of the really brilliant activists who took those lessons from the HIV movement and applied them to the intersex movement was Beau Laurent. She literally ran multiple organizations and even used different names for, so that she could function as an insider who would be invited to the table by the people who didn't want the loud activist, and she was the loud activist. And yeah, so I learned from her as well. But that kind of insider outsider churn and connection and planning and coordination, we need you to put some pressure right now because we can't move this fast enough. Like, it's really, really important to making a successful movement. And I think this is something that was done well in the civil rights era as well.
I think that's one reason the civil rights era began in the churches too, was to aid in this sense of this, you have to listen to us because of that. There's something about having a little bit of credibility. And I think that I've done a lot of activism in the street, but probably the most crazy revolutionary things I did was in a suit and a tie working for the city and county of San Francisco.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's respectability politics for sure. There's value in respectability politics. It's a mistake to think that that's the only way to move things forward, right? And sometimes the people that are too much at the table get too impatient with the people who are out in the street. But really, an effective movement needs both, And some of us have been privileged to sit on both sides of that or to work closely on both sides. But I think that's when movements are most effective, is when they avoid infighting and they understand that you need the radicals out in the street and you need the people at the table and you need them to be coordinated.
We have a question in the chat. How do you teach patience to a generation that has grown up with a significantly shorter attention span?
Text.
I'm not the most patient person in the world, but I think that Anne touched on it briefly, and that is that change is incremental. And as I have said, we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's also the way that change happened. And finally, that there are places where you have to compromise and wait. And I hate that because I want the bad stuff to end immediately. But, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single footstep.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say, I don't know exactly how to teach the younger generation, because I think there are different ways of talking and communicating now. And I recognized as soon as I said I'm learning to use Instagram that my kids would say, that is so over. Like, as soon as I was there, it was over, right? But this younger generation also gives me a lot of hope. They have internalized a lot of the lessons. And they don't always know where they came from, but they have internalized a lot of them that we had to learn and teach each other in painful ways. And they are much better, I think, at listening to each other. They're much better at overcoming difference. And I always say, when I talk to people who are so frustrated at where we are now politically, one of the things I always say is, we've already won the hearts and minds of the younger generation. That's one of the reasons the right is so scared right now. They know there's a pool of voters coming up that they've already lost them. I really think they're trying to get all the control they can right now because of who's coming up. And so, it's a two-way street, right? Just like you need people at the table and you need people in the streets, you need elders and you need young people in a movement, and they ideally will communicate and learn from each other.
Someone in the chat said the avoiding the infighting is key. And I think that's part of the bridge building that we could do. I had the honor throughout my 30s of volunteering at a summer camp. It was a leadership camp for LGBTQ plus teenagers and working with a lot of the younger generation. And I think sometimes with them, it was just framing it, especially for campers that had returned, that had been there the summer before and came back the next summer. And I'd just say, remember where you were last summer. You couldn't picture where you would be now, right? And starting to inculcate a little bit of that like forward thinking and that starting to think about things in a really long term. And I would use a lot of nature metaphors, maybe because we were at a summer camp, but I'd point to some of the trees and say, like, these little saplings, when you are a grown adult, they'll still be teenagers. They're like this tall right now. When you're a full grown adult, they'll be this tall. And that's the way we kind of have to look at the work that we do sometimes. It's like, okay, I'm going to nurture this thing so that it can get to be that tall, so that the next generation of campers can watch it get that's all.
I actually have a lot of hope about the younger people. That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me being an activist, because you are, I'm going to say you to the other folks on this panel, you are doing the work. I'm an old guy. I'm 68. I am tired. I cannot be out in the streets. I cannot be holding up signs. And you guys are now have picked up the mantle and have taken that baton that Anne talked about and are moving it on. So you give me hope in times like these that we will prevail and we will get through this together as a community.
Yeah, and what you said, Alexis, made me think of one of my favorite sayings, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but the best time to plant a tree is 50 years ago, and the next best time to plant a tree is today. And, what's amazing is, so 50 years ago, people planted trees that I'm enjoying now, and I planted my trees 30 years ago, and there's a whole bunch of people planting trees today.
I was just also going to reflect on attention spans because as I have progressed in a career in journalism, that has also been more and more the focus of a lot of content making is really how do you keep the attention span of the younger people, and it's interesting too. I mean, there are ways in which that has informed the series in the way of it's been drilled into me, you've got to hook people immediately and then let it unfold, and it's interesting. I think there are ways in which that has shaped storytelling in a good way. I think that's it's interesting, that balance of where do we sort of accept that in order to, okay, the attention spans are short, so we will think about that in the shaping of the content so that we can sort of deliver the message, and how we are trying to shape content in another way to kind of lengthen the attention span. So I think that's just a really interesting push and pull thinking, just specifically from an attention span in taking in media perspective about that. That dynamic between people's attention spans, and because there is so much content in the world, how do you keep that? And I actually think that there is once you hook people, you are then able to have the expansive conversation. So that's also an interesting kind of way that I've been shaped in my content making.
Political messaging now has to be done in sound bites, and social change is happening in sound bites. So in order to be an effective leader, to talk to people, you have to deliver information that way.
Okay, so with that, we're just about at time. I want to offer the opportunity for some of the panelists to give maybe some quick closing statements, and then I'll turn it back over to Amara.
Sure, I'll go and give Marcus the last word. I mean, I think I've said a lot of the things I have to say, but I do want to offer some appreciation to you guys for doing this story. It's personally immensely gratifying to hear that my story is of value to someone and to have it taken down where maybe someday my kids will see it. But I do believe that this learning from each other and learning across generations is very important. And I think it's really valuable what you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to dovetail on that to say, I come from storytelling tradition, being Native American, and I hear from too many young people they don't know about their past. How did you guys do these things? So the value of the projects that Outwards does is immeasurable because you've allowed us to leave a blueprint for future generations to follow, and they in turn will leave their own blueprints. So I couldn't be more grateful because there's so many of people who are no longer with us, whose stories are preserved and archived for people who are yet unborn to be able to hear. So I couldn't be more grateful to Outwards for that.
And I really could not be more grateful to the two of you and for our other guests on the program. It has been truly such an honor to be able to speak with you and to hear your stories and to be able to put them out into the world and to also have them speak to the Outwards archive as a whole too. Really, as you're saying, Marcus, feels very powerful to be able to archive these. And as you were saying, Anne, hopefully there is a nugget in here that inspires somebody that down the line that that has been a catalyst. And sort of like you were saying, Alexis, we don't know what will inspire people. So to be able to make a series and send it into the world, and we don't know where it's going to go, but that is it's just been such a phenomenal thing to be a part of. So thank you all.
We thought of things that people said were impossible and we made them possible. I can't imagine what young people are going to envision and create.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I'm very grateful to all of our guests and our audience for being here today. We worked on this initiative for about 2 years and this event for months. So it's truly a collaborative experience, and it's so nice to be able to present it to you all. Thank you to Alexis for your stellar moderation, and to Kai and Luca for being here and also for sharing your experience and their hand in creating this work. Big love to Jack as well. I'm very much looking forward to the day that his new baby will be able to enjoy the work that he does and the work that we do. And to Marcus and Anne and Suji, who couldn't be here, but is here with us, of course, in their work and in spirit, for sharing just your wisdom and your time. Both Anne and Suji's episode and Marcus's episode are out now. So if you want to hear more of their stories and if you want to hear their episodes in full, you can go to queeringprecedent.org, or you can also listen wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll be able to find it. Just search Queering Precedent. And with that, I guess we'll let you all go. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.